Okay, so understanding the minds of boys and girls. Now, even that itself can be controversial. So does anyone know what I mean? What do I mean? It's controversial. Who wants to take a risk and lay it on me? Anybody? Go ahead.
That kids choose their gender.
Got it. She said that kids choose their gender. Okay? So here at this talk, I just want to say, at this talk and in all of our work, we know that there's a current in culture that keeps alive the concept that actually emerged about 30 years ago, the androgyny concept. So again, I'll be 60 next year, so I'm born in 1958. As I was coming up as a young feminist, and by the way, I would still consider myself a feminist, equal rights for women, so if that's what feminism means, I am definitely that. As I was coming up, raised by two feminist parents, going through the academic systems, we were, the 70s was very much about androgyny. That there was going to be a human being that is male-female, and then that'll get rid of male-female. Male-female will go away because it's going to be androgynous. So it penetrated the culture, and then 10, 20 years ago, I believe I'm one of the people that have helped to look at that and say, no, there's brain science here. It's a really neat concept, but we have these different demographics of people. And I will argue, by the way, and I'll show you scans today of males who I will call bridge brain. So about 20 years ago, I took that and I said, no, we're not going to get rid of male-female. Here's why. I can show you the scans. But there are some folk who are bridge brains, who bridge male and female. And those are the folks who we would say, oh, I bet that's what we mean by androgynous. But those folks are 1 in 5 to 1 in 7. So they're the exceptions that prove the rule. The exceptions that prove the rule. The rule is still male-female. So I'm going to make the argument now that we are in the same place in a way that we were in 30 years ago, where there's a current in the culture that avoids science, can't look at the science. Because if folks look at the science, then they'll just have to say, okay, we can't make the point we're making. So they don't look at the science. And what they say is there's no male and female, or as you said, male and female is chosen. So since male and female is chosen, we should basically get rid of he and she. And because there isn't a he and she, right? So what I've done here is lay out what we really mean, because they're actually not talking about the thing we're talking about, okay? So there are actually 4 parts to this. When anyone talks about male-female, there are 4 parts to it. And if you want to have fun with this, get this Time magazine article. It was called Beyond He or She. And you can go on the internet and get it. It was a cover story, and it happened about, I'd say it's a year ago now, Beyond He or She, in which they were making the sort of culture-based or anecdotal. We talked to 80 people, they said, and these 80 people don't think there's a he and she anymore, right? So of course it's not science. But get that, because it's really interesting to see how far people go to manipulate this conversation for each of their ideological reasons. And remember, I think their ideological reason is protective. I think they believe if we can get males and females to be the same, then we will no longer have oppression of women. So I really believe the bottom line for these folks is protective. They want to protect women. And they believe that girls and women are harmed when we look at males and females from different lenses. Okay? So they are protective people. They're just wrong. So they're wrong because they're not talking about the thing we're talking about. All right, so there's so you've got to be talking about 4 things at once. There's anatomical sex, right? So that's obviously your reproductive organs, the genes that come in on the X and the Y. XX is female, XY is male, Y is the male, okay? And then obviously your anatomy and your body, the amount of iron you process. Males process iron differently than females. Calcium, how your cells are set up, right? Y cells are set up somewhat differently than X cells. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is sex in the brain. So the X and Y chromosomes hit the system, right? Hit the mom as the mom is carrying the baby and hit the baby. And between around 4 weeks to 6 months in utero, the hormones hit the system and say, okay, wait a minute, this is a male, this is a Y, right? We got to hit that system differently than X. X is going to be female. XX is female, XY is going to be male. So since we got a Y in these cells, that system's got to shift, and the hormones are going to shift it, and it's going to reformat the brain. Okay, so, and that will become more clear, especially in the next 30 minutes, become even more clear how that happens in utero. So when you think about why is it that guys in all cultures, why is it they throw things? And they love to move objects through space. Why does that exist in every culture that we study? Something happened between 4 weeks and 6 months in utero that reformatted the brain so that males are more spatial in the way they approach the world. That's sex on the brain, okay? And then sexual orientation. Obviously, sexual orientation is what they're really talking about when we talk about LGBTQ. And take the T out, because I'm going to cover that in a moment, but LGBTQ. What we're talking about there generally is sexual orientation. Not always with the Q, but generally is sexual orientation, lesbian, gay, bisexual. Okay? So that's its own category, and that is handled by a nucleus in the brain, the sexually dimorphic nucleus, and there are genes that are passed down for that. Right? So that's not sex on the brain. That's not anatomical sex. That's a different topic, sexual orientation. And then the fourth is gender fluidity. And that's the concept that we all just pick who we feel like we are that day. If that's what everyone is talking about, then we got to make sure that's what we're talking about. And the argument that I would make is that the systems, especially as relates to guys and issues boys have in school and boys have in neighborhoods, and the loss of males, the high suicide rate among males, gang violence, social emotional dysfunction, and now a lot of time spent in front of screens, not maturing till 30, 35, if at all. A lot of that grows from a systems failure. We tried to take out male from this, and that's caused us big trouble over the last 25, 30 years. And part of why we've tried to do it is because we were conflating, putting these four together in our culture conversation, and we really should separate these. So there's no doubt that someone can wake up one day and say, you know what? I'm 5 years old. I happen to be male. I've been dressed in blue the last 5 years. I would like to wear pink today, right? How great is that? Like, who cares? Great. Wear pink. And guess what? Today I would like to play with dolls. And in fact, I'd like to play with dolls for the next month. Great. Play with dolls, okay? That's people experimenting with, at even the youngest ages, trying to figure all this out for themselves and expand and diversify their consciousness of who it is to be a human being. That would be under number 4, gender fluidity. And one of the funnest things to do is to look at our own lives and compare what we were thinking when we were 20 or 21, 22, and then what we think after we have kids, right? So we're thinking all sorts of stuff when we're like in college, and then we have children. And especially around things like sex and gender in the brain, you can tell me, what happens by the time you're like 30 or 35 and now you have 2 girls and 2 boys, or 1 boy and 1 girl? What happens? Do you think the same way you thought when you were 20, when you were thinking, I just get to pick who I am? You think a little differently, don't you? 35 or 40? Yeah, because by then you've had the kids and you go, oh, wait a minute, there's something going on here. My girls and my boys they're all human. We're, all the same, right? We're all human, but there's something going on. Okay, so that's the context in which I hope we will do number 4. So when you see things like beyond he or she or stuff like that, then we need to say, okay, hold on, which are they talking about? And when we talk about transgender, what we used to call transsexual and it shifted to transgender, what we're talking about is around 0.3% of our population who we now know, and I have this in Saving Our Sons, and then The Minds of Girls will be coming out in January. I have it in The Mind of Girls as well. But if you want it now, you can get it in Saving Our Sons. The research on what's happening in the brain of transgender, transsexual, transgender, we now can see that if it's a male to female, that the brain is set up like more of a female brain, but the body has male anatomy, right? That creates a disconnect between the brain and the body. If it's female to male, obviously the other way. The brain is male. There are 7 or 8 centers of the brain that are activated male, but the body is female. And it creates a lot of depression. It creates a lot of suicide. It's a very difficult way to live. And these are folks that really need our help, right? So that's in a category where the brain is disconnected from the body. That's around 0.3 or 0.4% of our population. And obviously that's in the news quite a bit, and I believe will be for the next decade, if not forever, because I do believe we're going to be creating more and more folk who create a more diverse landscape. Our genetic systems are shifting slightly. And so I would expect us to have more transgender 10 years from now even than we have now. At the same time, it's an exception that proves the rule. The rule is that male-female brain difference exists. And then there are exceptions to the rule.